What is up YouTube? Welcome back to another PROCREATE tutorial where today again we're back at it with the charcoals and we've got a lovely little waterfall landscape scene. Now as always there's links to the charcoal palette that I use pretty much for all of these charcoal tutorials in the description down below. You'll find a link to my Patreon where you can go ahead and grab all the requirements. That is the canvas size, there is a guide for today's design, the charcoal palette, and everything else is built into PROCREATE. You won't need anything else. Like I said, I've actually done charcoal tutorials here on YouTube and on Patreon exclusively multiple times now, so the process is very similar if you've already done them before. So make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them when you're done. Check out my Patreon because that's where I post 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters, and there's a catalogue now of over 140 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording. Anyway, with all of that said, enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So as you can see on my screen, I do have a guide which I've provided for you. Very, very simple. I just want to make sure we speed up the process in a little bit of a way. Now I'm going to go ahead and immediately bring that opacity down. Now to about 25% is fine. If you go up to your actions and go to the option of add, that is where you want to go ahead and insert the photo of the PNG of the guide that I've provided. And all I've done is tapped on it and renamed it and called it guide, just so we don't remove it. Now we're going to go ahead and create a new layer and drag it underneath the guide. And we're going to go to our colours. We've got my charcoals palette that I traditionally use quite a lot in these. I'm just going to go to the bottom left colour in the palette. I'm going to go to my brush. My brush of choice is charcoals and the 6B compressed. I like to leave it at 50% and then size can fluctuate quite a bit. We'll just work out what we like as and when we hit certain elements. Now the first part of this is just blocking in a load of grey basically. So around about, let's go 30%. I think that's a good spot. We're just going to go ahead and sort of block this in. Now I traditionally don't actually like going right to the edge of the canvas. So I'm going to block in what will eventually be some large stone up here. And then I like to kind of just leave a bit of a kind of blend out on the edge there in terms of leaving it. I'm going to go across the back of the waterfall because how I do these tutorials is we work through the sort of lighter greys into the darker greys and then all the detail comes from our highlights. So we're going to go ahead and block this in. We'll do another one up here and block that in there. You can make as many kind of rocky kind of shapes as much as you like, and then again just let it kind of blend out. If you press really lightly and just sort of push it, it will give you that nice softer approach. Again, we are just going to block everything in at the beginning here, so I'm going to come down. We'll come down the foreground into this area here. We're going to block this in, kind of blend it out a little bit using the actual charcoal brush for a minute. Do the same over here. Another little bit of a block in. Now while I've got you so early on in this tutorial, please just take a second and look down below the video and triple check you are subscribed, because I know so many people watch these videos every single week and are not subscribed to the channel. So just triple check you are, you'd be supporting me and all the work that I put into these videos. It helped me out a great deal. Now let's go ahead and continue just sort of blocking this in. Of course, I'm going to just do the waterfall in the kind of direction I want it to flow in. Pretty much, to be honest with you, all of this ends up grey anyway. I just want to make sure, should there be any apparent lines sort of showing, that I don't want them to flow in an opposite direction to what the element actually is. So we're going to flow the grey down and in towards the bottom here. You can see I'm trying to leave a bit of a gap between here and this foreground element. I'm going to go ahead and block this one in too. Go along here. And then again, they're all just trying to flow in the direction that they will go in. So like a little bit downwards, like so. And then just lightly kind of touching that into there. Then what we're going to do is just put the bushes in. So I'm going to make the brush size about sort of 36%. And if I tap and just kind of push, I can create like quite a lot of grain in here. And I want to build up the bush here on the right. Now the light source is going to come from behind here and across. So this is going to be very, very dark here. For a minute though, we're just going to carry on inputting the texture and the sort of general shape here of this bush. You might be able to get some nice soft edges to it as well to show all that kind of small detail within the actual bush as well. So we're just going to keep tapping and pushing that across. It might look a little bit lighter than this, and that's perfect because of course the bush isn't going to be quite as dense or as sort of strong, of course, as the stone. So you can do the same over here. This bush is ultimately going to end up a little bit lighter anyway because the actual lighting is going to come across here. Now I'm going to leave a gap. I'll put in some more in here too. And of course, don't forget we're shading technically at the minute. We will reveal the edge later on. But for now, it's just blocking in the main shape of it, pushing that bush up there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very lightly in here go left to right and kind of blend that up a little bit with a bit of grey. And I'll get a bit closer to the waterfall just to see if I can get some more in there. And then we're going to get into a bit of a smudging. So we're going to go to our smudge tool and set that up. If we tap on our smudge tool, you want to be in airbrushing in the medium brush. I always set the opacity to about 50%. Size will just fluctuate depending on what you're doing. So about 7% looks pretty good. I can just go ahead and go very lightly left to right just to start with, and then just blend that up, getting a lovely softer aesthetic to it. And just keep taking your time. Don't destroy the bushes though. Let the bushes look quite nice and sharp. It's not a problem if you do accidentally kind of do that though, because we can fix it basically. Now try to sort of go horizontal. I know I tried to trick myself there a little bit and go a little bit kind of upright, but you want the lines to again all flow in the right direction. So once you've done that, you can go back to your brush if you want and just dab with your pen just to get some of those lovely speckles in there, just a little bit like so. And then we're going to carry on with our smudge tool. There's a couple of things I want to smudge out. I want to smudge out down here at the bottom because this is going to ultimately end up, I'm going to go a bit bigger, about 12%. You can push up or you can push down. It's dependent on what you want to try and achieve. At the minute, we're just trying to get that really soft look, and I want this to kind of fade out into white here. So I'm just going to blend that out. I'm going to bring my brush size down to like a 5% and just kind of wiggle my pen along this edge here, just behind that foreground element. Likewise here too. Wiggle that down there just to soften it a tiny bit. Don't have to do too much at this stage. The only other thing we want to do is just sort of smudge out on the edge of frame. I like that softer aesthetic. You may not. You can push in from out here to kind of push it back into the middle of your canvas. You can blend in both directions. It'll look really nice. Leave the bushes at the top though, and we'll leave the foreground just for a second. Let's go ahead and really darken this up then. So let's go ahead, we're working on the same layer. Now with these charcoal tutorials, I typically go ahead and advise you, if you're someone who wants to like revert back potentially if you do too much, just swipe this to the left and duplicate it. And then what I do is I turn off the bottom one. I always rename it and call it BU for backup. So if I need to, I can jump straight back to the start of this now stage with the darker tones, and I'm good to go. I don't need to worry about it. And you can too. It just takes the pressure off, and we don't need to worry about layers too much in this because we're not going to use very many at all. So if you want those backups, you've got it. And then work on the one that's turned on. Go to your colors, grab the middle of the first column. Your brush wants to go back again, of course, to 6B. And let's just take a look at our brush size, maybe around about 23%. We want to block in our waterfall. So behind the waterfall is going to be nice and dark, of course, because no light's going to be getting through. So we're going to darken up the top of it. And then just push down. Again, you want it to go in the direction you intend the motion to go in. If you leave little gaps in here, like if there's little bits of grey, I do not hate that at all. I think it would arguably look even better to have that little bit of variety in there. So try not to input too much and just let it kind of flow over the top of those grey tones below it. So just a little bit down into here. Beside, however, of the waterfall, we want that to be dark. That's going to be stone. So I'm going to set that to about 20%. If you need to, you can turn your guide on and off as we do this, or even bring the opacity even lower down to like a 10%. And still working on our charcoal layer. I want to get right up close to that line and darken that up quite a bit. I just want to really show how dark it is over here. And then what we need to do up here is we need to take a look at our shape, and we need to kind of start to construct some rocky kind of shaping to it. So I'm going to go along the top edge now and kind of just block in a few random kind of big blocky areas here, maybe a big stony here, and then I'll go down, just kind of, I'm imagining how that big bit of rock flows down and in towards the waterfall. I'll do the same with this little line here that I created and just keep adding in some streaks going down, and then likewise there. So I've got kind of 3 that you can see there, but already you're leaving gaps in between to signify kind of a breakup of the actual shape. Let's go to about 13% brush size and just wiggle in some darker tone down here. You know, leave those lovely grey tones at the top just to kind of break it up a bit. And as long as you kind of remember the sort of blueprint that you just tried to lay out, you can always come back to it and address it. Again, I want to go really dark down into here. So I'm just trying to get as close to this foreground element as possible, but making sure that that is nice and strong here. Again, I don't mind the waterfall having a bit more of a lighter tone to it. That's no stress. Let's move across to the opposite side. Now, even though this is going to ultimately end up in the lighting a bit more, we want to just see if we can add in a bit of dark tone as well. So we're going to come down towards the bottom, up against the edge of the waterfall. I still want that to have that dark kind of recessed look to it. So I'm following that line of the guide. And then as we break away from there, I'm just going to try and imagine, again, I've got a block here, And we need to highlight the, well, I say shadow, should I say, the left-hand side. So if I imagine that there's like a block here and a block here, then I want to just dig into this gap here where I imagine that the shadow tone is, and just kind of blend that in, leaving the grey on the right-hand side so that I can add in some lovely highlight on that stone in a minute. And it doesn't really matter necessarily at this stage as well. If you put something in that you don't like, you can always add in highlight in a minute that will just simply address it and it will fix it up. I'm just going to get some darker lines, little streaks, etc., all running down and in towards that central point. You can start to see some of the structure try to sort of take place a little bit more. We'll darken up down into there just a tad. And then if we take a look at the foreground in a similar way, that lighting's not going to come across. It's not going to touch onto our scene. So down here is going to end up quite dark. Over here, we could probably highlight quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my brush size down to like 11%. Look for the shapes. Again, I can see this little ledge here. So what if I imagined that that was like a block here, like a block here, and then maybe another little block up there? You don't have to stagger it like that, but if I would imagine that that is a block, I'd imagine that this side over here, this kind of face of it, would end up really dark. Then there'd be like a groove here between these two rocks. I'm going to try and draw in some quite steep lining in here. And then let's imagine that then there's a big dark patch in behind there for like another rock as well. So I can just, with a larger brush size now, about 20%, darken up into there, zoom out. You should start to, again, be able to see those structures and sort of shapes all come to life. Down here, it does want to be quite dark, so don't be afraid to overdo the shadows a little bit. Try and remember again the blueprints that you've just tried to lay out. Equally over here, we're going to do exactly the same as what we did up here. So we're looking for where we want our blocks to be. I'm going to imagine my main stone is here, and then everything else works around that. So I'm going to imagine that that sort of comes across, end up with a shadow over here on the side of it. I'll leave that top surface, and then we'll just darken up in there, create another little groove there as such. The side of that stone, bit of a dark streak in here. And don't be afraid to add in darker random areas as well, you know, add in variety in that. I love to say it, and you know what I'm going to say, that randomness of life, and just allow the colour to just have somewhere to sit. Random bits of detail that ultimately might just give you something that's random looking but looks so much more genuine. That's the thing we're trying to look for. Let's go back to the bushes then at the very top. Let's go up to about sort of let's go a bit larger than that. Let's go up to around about sort of 35%. This bush on the right, you want to be punching it in. And again, with that tapping motion and tapping a little bit of a push to it, you want to be trying to work out now how dark it's going to get just above the top of these stones here where these bushes are, you know, a little bit further back in our scene. So I'm going to go down to about 25% here just to get as close to it as possible, and just tap in and push in. And with a smaller brush size, you might even be able to also, you know, try to create little clusters of dark tone. I'm going to go right to the edge down here, especially just to show how dark it is for this part of the bush. Over here, we need to be a little bit more particular. Let's go 25%. Let's try and darken up in the sort of bottom of all these little clusters. So I see little circles here. So when I see a little circle, I think, okay, the bottom area of that, I want to be darkening up and how it all ends up in the shadow. And then I can push up from here, pushing up to create the sort of under shadow of this large bushy area. Again, you don't really have to super detail this, to be honest with you, to the same level that I am. You can probably get away with leaving it a little bit more sort of just packed in, and then you can come back to it and sort it out with the highlights. I'm going to bring my brush size down just to something a bit smaller again, so I can get a good amount of darkness in here, but also pack it in right up close to the edge there. You can see that bush then has a little bit of dark tone. I'm just going to kind of connect those two areas together. I've got much more I can do with it in terms of highlight later on, so I'd rather have the dark tone be in there and a bit more of it, arguably looking too dark, but then I can just add in as much highlight as I like later on. So we've got the bushes in play now, and just like I kind of did down here, I'm just going to bring the brush size down to like an 11% and just try and randomly just dash in at all sorts of angles here, just random little scatterings all over the place just to give those rocks a bit of texture. So let's go ahead and we're going to do exactly the same process. So again, if you're happy at this stage, what you can do is you can delete your backup that you made earlier, swipe this one to the left and duplicate it, and make this your new backup, because we're going to add darker tone again. So you can rename it BU and then go to your new layer above, Make sure to turn off the one underneath. And then on this layer, we'll add in our new black tone, top of the first column. Similar process as we've just been doing. Let's focus on our waterfall first. Let's go ahead and set the brush size to like a 9%. Let's run some streaks of darkness in here where maybe the water starts to thin out a little bit and then you're just left with the darkness down here. I'm trying to be a little bit lighter as I go here, just trying to take my time to kind of build in these little streaks. But I want that little bit of grey to be available should I need it. Again, we're going to work just beside the waterfall here in this kind of rocky space, just outlining the edge and then just trying to darken up into this little drop off this kind of rocky edge here. Now at this stage you are really working in your darker tones. So for example, where we imagined earlier on that that's a shape, that's a shape, and that's a shape of these kind of rocky ledges, you want to work in your darkest tones in there. So for example, I might have to sort of darken up here, and then as that comes across, I can really sort of let that shape take place. I can get in some dark grooves in there. Maybe I can imagine that there's a bit of a dark groove here, but leaving the grey gives you that separation. Now, please don't forget, you can always go back to those previous tones that we were working with. So if you want to bring in a bit more of a particular shaping to this, just go back and add that in. Now down here, I'm just going to wiggle my pen because I want to get some much needed dark tone in this area here for contrast. That's what charcoals are all about. It's just about building up contrast and that variety in colour. So we've got some really dark tones and they just look like they're a bit soft at the minute, and that's on purpose because of course once we get into the highlights we'll be able to really pull them out. Let's go down this edge of the waterfall again in this dark spot, trying not to do too much if I'm honest. And then I'm looking for those dark patches that I added in before and going, all right, cool, let's add in some much needed contrast in there. Behind that little speck, can I add some in? And again, I don't want it to look repetitive or anything like that, so it matches the randomness of life. Yeah, I know, I get boring to hear. I apologise. Let me know in the comments if that's something you hate hearing, but we're just going to keep blocking this in. To be honest with you, there are all the repetitions of things that especially if you're new to my channel, that I like to implement in my teaching. So I hope it's methods that you take on board and take with you into your next project and so on. So look at how nice we've got those little light bits of grey either side of our waterfall now, just giving that slight little outline to it. Again, we've got all these lovely little streaks in here, and then we'll bring that brush size down again and just see if we can patch in random little bits of dark tone by just being random, crisscrossing your kind of pen across itself multiple times. Let's just see if we can get a little bit of extra darkness in the waterfall, just having some variety and contrast levels like we were saying. There we go. Down here in the foreground, we just repeat what we've already done. You're looking for now your darker spots in these rocks, etc. and going, all right, cool, let's really get aggressive with applying the application of these lovely dark tones, crisscrossing as I go, just to create variety, create the top surfaces, etc. We'll do the same over here, just crisscrossing, laying it in only the darker spots based off of the blueprint that we just did in the previous sets of colours. So I can probably get away with now just kind of bringing a bit more of a dark tone off towards the edge of the screen there. In your bushes at the top, we do exactly the same as we did before. 28%, lovely. Let's patch this in nice and dark at the base of this bush. Again, this one's going to primarily be in the shadow anyway. So I want to have some nice contrast up here, especially in the sort of base of it, like so. And then as we move across, we'll get some towards the bottom end down here as well. Just patching that across, getting some lovely dark tones, and just letting it be a bit kind of random with its application. But you should end up with some lovely darkness in there. And that's actually come together very nicely. Now this is when we move into our actual highlighting, etc. So you've gone all the way to your darkest tone. We're now going to do the application of white. Now we don't actually apply white. What we do is we actually just go ahead and erase from it. So again, you can get rid of your backup at this stage if you want. Delete that. On this layer, again, swipe it to the left and duplicate it, turn off the bottom one. You don't always have to rename it, but on this one here that's still turned on that you can see, go to your eraser and then tap on your eraser. Let's get this set up. So we want to use the Eagle Hawk brush. So I'm going to go ahead and swipe that to the left and find it. And it is in the category Drawing and Eagle Hawk. Now, sometimes I use the airbrushing as well. I use airbrushing and the medium brush. Now, we'll start with medium brush and then we'll start to get into some more actual grainy material and kind of sharpness using the Eagle Hawk. So let's set our brush size to 2% and our opacity to 51. I like to be able to build up that color. The first part we're going to work in is our waterfall up here. So with a 1%, we're going to first of all really lighten this up. Now, because it's set to 50%, you do one streak, it's 50, you build that up, that's almost 100, and that pretty much is 100 there on top. So you've got loads and loads of time to build it up. One thing I'm also going to do is I'm going to go to my eraser, tap on the medium brush and just go to my stabilization and just crank that up a little bit, 50-50 roughly, just so I can get some more smooth lining in there. Might go a bit lower, 40, 30, either way. It's best on your preference. So I'm going to bring that down to about 2%, wiggle it along that top edge. We want that to be nice and bright where the light is simply just catching on the very top surface of our water. Like that, so it's going to be nice and bright up on the top. Then as it drifts down, we're going to come down, and this is where you want that stabilization. So I'm going to bring the brush size maybe a little bit larger just so I can get some light streaks in here. Now this particular part of the waterfall does take a little bit of time because you need to find your rhythm with your kind of wrist motion here and how the water kind of falls over here. And it's really kind of tricky in the kind of smaller brush sizes. So take your time. You know, sometimes my pressure is so light that it doesn't even register. So maybe I can go to 20% opacity and press it a little bit firmer just so I can find that balance of what is most comfortable for me as I'm drawing it to get those streaky lines in there. And because I'm at a much lower percentage now, I can bring my brush size down to like a 1 to 2% and I can build in some really particular lining in here. So what I've done there is with around about a 5% before, just kind of laid in a little bit of a kind of blueprint. I keep saying it, but it's just part of the process. The blueprint for laying in where that water does crash over the top and letting it just run down. There's so much activity in here that it's just a lot going on. So you just have to kind of start simple and then build it in, layer in, and let there be dark gaps in there as well. You know, let that have a little bit of space to live. You know, try and create variety though, so that as it comes down on one side, you know, maybe there's it's a tighter gap here, so there's not quite as dark a tone here as that side, but that variety will look absolutely stunning. So bring that down, all the way down. As you get towards the bottom, let your brush pressure just get a little bit lighter as you get all the way towards the bottom of your waterfall. You know, let's go ahead and run in another one. Quite bright at the top, and then just imagine that it kind of blends out towards the bottom. Go a bit bigger, maybe a 2%, just to add in variety of your brush strokes. And again, this is where you can bring back in the edge of your waterfall if you really want to, and press kind of a little bit firmer down that edge to get that quite sharp look to it. I'm really happy with how that already looks, but the next stage is to start working in the bottom area. So we'll stick with the brush at around about 4%, and you kind of want to go around in like circular motions and just like pushing it around. I'm going to go 7 in fact, just to kind of push this all the way up, create that real heavy look of the water's crashing down into this space here, and it's throwing up all the moisture into the air. And this is where you can start to define your sections a little bit more. Don't have it all consistent as well. Like leave a gap like there, you know, at that particular moment, at that particular part of your vision looking at the scene, there was not a lot of mist in that gap. You know, there was a break based off of the water flow, etc. So you can do the same. 3% now, just a little bit smaller. I can wiggle my pen to create kind of flowing lines almost, and particular kind of shapings in here. And you want to get very close, but not quite right up to that edge of this particular shape at the front here. It's not to say you can't actually press quite firm and get right there. That's not a problem. Just don't go over the top, to be honest. So a couple of little flick ups here and there. Very wiggly, very random, very, you know, just messy almost, to be honest with you. A little bit messy. It's not always got to be super perfect. Let's go ahead and just emphasize like a small patch here that I want to make it a little bit whiter down in this area here. I want to keep packing that in. There we go, that's a lot brighter in that little spot, maybe an occasional little sort of, and I'm still at 20% opacity on the brush. So just a few little flick ups here. Let's take a look at that. I've got a lovely little bit of sort of mist and it's rising up the scene. Now it's at this stage where you can then start to, with this brush, about sort of 2% with your brush size, just add in little dashes here that are super light. Again, we're still at that 20%, so it's going to take a little bit of time to do this. We are going to switch the brush in a second to that eagle hawk, but I'm just trying to get in like a few little sort of crashing bits of water all over the place now, and just showing like the crash. It's just quite violent down here almost. So lots and lots of flick ups. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the eraser. So let's tap on it. Let's go back up to inking, and we want that eagle hawk brush. So it's actually not in inking, it's in drawing. Eagle hawk. I've got the opacity set to about 80, but you can fluctuate it up and down. You know, take your time. Maybe 50 is actually more appropriate. So let's start with there. I've got a 9% brush size, and this will just allow you to draw in with like a bit of a taper almost, and also like a little bit of pressure compared to the other brush. So you can press like a little bit all over the place now, and just add in lots and lots of flicks. And I sort of urge you to spend as long as you can here, sort of dashing away, creating flicks of motion. It will make it really look like you just caught a still in time. And then if you bring your opacity up 80%, brush maybe a little bit smaller, down to 5, you can put in these little droplets that are going to be much more white. You are going to really emphasize particular little dashes here. Take your time, don't do too many in one particular area. You want variety in tone, but you don't want anything that's too sort of stand out. Feel free to also run down the waterfall, you know, bring that back down to about sort of 30-40%. Come down the waterfall with some, you know, little streaks almost. We are going to detail the waterfall in a minute even more, but you can just get in there and start to draw actual lines coming down, but also little dashes in there too. So just run those streaks all the way down in towards the water. Again, I want this to look, as I said, like a still in time. You're drawing it, you're capturing an exact moment. It's not been sort of exposed for too long in like a long exposure of a photograph. It is just simply a boom, one still. That's it. Freeze frame of life. So a few more streaks in here, very vertical at this point. And again, we're probably going to keep that going all the way up. So let's do a few more while we're here in that top section. So the middle to top as we make our way up. And again, you just want to kind of define little edges here and there if you want to, you know, like the very edge over here. And then look for some of the brighter spots. Notice how I'm not really going into that dark area because I don't want to break that. I want to keep that nice and elusive and exclusively quite dark as well. Let's go down here, just scraping as we go. This starts to get to the point, and I'll say it later on, I know I will, but it starts to get to the point later on where you just start to take artistic liberties and you can give it that really rough, scratchy look to it. This waterfall part is the most kind of detailed part of this particular tutorial today. So this is where we're going to emphasize as much as possible the detail, the sharpness of the actual scene. Now let's change our opacity. Let's go to about sort of 50% here. These are going to get much brighter. In fact, you could probably go back up to that 80 if you wanted to, just as it sort of rounds off the top. Feel free to turn off your guide for a minute as well, so you can see this completely uninterrupted, and then you can add in little specks, maybe even like a little speck of water here and there that's, you know, just drifting off on its own. You know, feel free to also put some of these in the actual waterfall as well. So, you know, just a particular part that's catching a bit of detail, a little bit of sharpness. Yeah, let them kind of scatter as they cascade over the top, little dashes. And again, we're still at that 80%. I'm saving 100% for later on because we want to be able to just add in that very fine, top level, final bit of detail that would just look so nice. So we'll just zoom out. I'm going to undo that last one. That one looked a bit too out of sorts. It also looked a little bit too big. Just scraping my way through here. Trying not to go too low with this higher percentage. So keep the higher percentage just towards the top because that's where the light is. You want to show that light coming over the top there. Now you can go ahead and set your brush size a bit bigger, like a 10%, and go down to about 20% opacity, and if you need to, you can just run in a few little sort of lines here and there where you feel is necessary to break anything up. Like I'm starting to see like a bit too much of the dark tone, to be honest with you. So I'm just looking at it thinking, how can I just break that down a little bit and just add in a bit more. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave this as it is. Now that's not to say that this is finished, this particular part. I just want to move on to the other areas so we can build up the level of detail together. Now if we go to the marker here that I've got, which is 36%, I'm going to set the opacity to around about 45, and we're going to use this now to block in our blocks. So where you're looking at your lighter grey, this is where you can now just simply just use the brush and create overlapping lines to create the lightest side of your stone. That is as simple as it needs to be. A little sort of crisscross there to add in another stone, and when you zoom out you get that impression of that lovely light area. We're going to move across and just keep doing it. So let's start over here. You can make the brush even bigger if you want to for like the larger spaces. You know, you could really max this out sort of around about 60 and just patch it in big stony areas just to get you started perhaps. You know, overlap them a few times, then go back down to your 36% and just crash that into all of these areas. Bring in your stonework to life, like completely to life. Your intention here is to overlap. You know, let this brush overlap as you keep doing stroke after stroke, just to really bring in the stone at the side of the profile there. And that can be nice and soft for a minute. I wouldn't go too high. I wouldn't eliminate too much light. Like don't go super mad too early. And then maybe like another little sort of element here. I'm going to bring that down. Like this is like looking like it's going to be like a little ledge in here almost. Perhaps like a little patch there. Just a random small one. In fact, let's maybe let that run across all the way to the left-hand side to show like staggered elements to it. And then I'm going to just bring that rock down a tiny bit more because the light's crashing across onto here. Now that side gets a lot of love like this, but this side, not quite so much. So this side, we're going to go ahead and bring the brush size down to about sort of a 4 to 5%. We're going to look for the top edges of what our shapes are. Now, I'm going to very quickly just show you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing like a shape here and a cut in between them. I'm seeing another block here, and then I've got this one here. So by sort of bringing them to the forefront of my mind and seeing where they are, I can go ahead and say, actually, okay, let's add in a bit of lighting here. Let's get up to 4% on the brush size, really light with my pressure. I'm just going to go ahead and just say, hang on, this is where the light's catching on here. Maybe there's a little bit of a little gap here that's just catching just the outline of that shape. And then again, I'll go ahead and do the same over here, where I can imagine actually about sort of a 10% on the brush size now that I could probably go a bit bigger, 15 to 20, get away with just the tiniest little bit of light just coming across onto there. And then here, I've got to go ahead and kind of show the top edge of this bit of rock, and the light just blends and fades off so quickly, and that's it. You just show a tiny bit of how you think that lighting's coming across. 5% again, I'm just going to go ahead and go over the top of that now, adding in some pretty sharp and pretty final kind of detail here, but just showing the brightest kind of area, just catching just the top edge. That's all we want to see. So now you've done kind of a brighter line over here, you can do exactly the same on this edge. So you can look for your shapes now, and you're just kind of drawing in the sharpest edges. I very nearly sort of boosted my opacity, and I'm going to actually do that. I've gone up to about sort of 70 to 80% now, and now I'm looking for those shapes and I'm trying to define those edges. And it's not to say you don't have to just define the edges, you can actually define even more the brightest side. What I mean by that is you can go back up to that kind of 30 to 40% there and patch in a big chunk of white and just say, no, this is really where the lighting is. I'm going to bring that back down to about 5% as I continue to just kind of think about adding in the brightest edges here. What do I think is going to look like it's landing with a lot of light on it? I'm just going to zoom out. Random little scratch marks, all kind of flowing in that little downward fashion, will look great. Let's imagine that these two here are getting so much light that it blocks this out a little bit. So I'll leave that, with the exception of just maybe down here, where then as that starts to recess, this one sticks out. Maybe it does catch the light again a bit more. These ones down here, you don't do those as much because the lighting is primarily coming across from the top. It's not going to catch. And you can just add it in on all of those little shapes. Just again, the right hand side of some of these bright patches, the blueprint of our scene that we've already been drawing out. So a little bit like so, to really emphasize those edges. When you zoom out and compress it all the way down, it should give you the impression of what it is you're looking for. You know, that's not to say that, okay, right, I imagine that these now are looking far too 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's just a bit boring. So I'm gonna bring my brush size up, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and connect this into here. I'm gonna show something completely different and try and create something interesting. That didn't pay off. So what's the exception? Well, okay, let's go ahead and do something different where maybe we let this all kind of connect in over here a bit more, and just it's one big rock with a big crack in it instead. So it's now one big uniformed shape, and then these two are separated individual shapes. So that's just what you can do sometimes to say, hang on, I've realized I've kind of just continued on and on and on in the same fashion. Let's kind of break it up and change it up. Let's maybe, in fact, cut straight across there, blend underneath that a little bit just to kind of get rid of some of that. I love the dark hole there though. I think that looks really fun. And then we carry on down to the foreground and repeat. So again, let's go to about the 36% mark. Let's bring the opacity down. Let's build it up. Let's take our time. I'm going to probably go a bit bigger actually. Let's go about 50 and then cut across the top surface of the rock. So top surface, top surface. Oh, that's nice. And then let's go ahead and kind of just run down like a few edges here on the rear. And there we go. We've got some just interesting kind of top edges of some rock. And in a similar way, we bring our brush size down to about 18% and opacity to about 50. And then you just sharpen up your highlights. So what's your brightest spots? A little sort of crashing in here. A little bit on that top edge as well. And some of them can get really white. That's perfectly fine. And then go even smaller with your brush, about sort of 5%, and get in those interesting detail lines. Because this is in your foreground, right in front of us, this is probably going to need a little bit more attention. You may need to start to sort of emphasize bits of detail, like little speckles of something here and there, like an interesting new piece of texture or something, or like a sharp gouge in the rock. Zoom all the way out, let it get really compressed, and then take a look again. I'm going to go ahead and maybe bring this down here into kind of the bottom left corner of our scene, as if the light's just about catching it, which means I can equally go ahead then and go back to my brush with black selected, and I can set that brush size to about 14%. I can reshadow this in here now. And again, you can always jump backwards and forwards. If you don't like something, just add in more color, add in more charcoal, and go again. Lovely. And then I'll go back to my eraser. We'll work on this side. Similar fashion, except the only thing we're going to do over here, we're going to set it to around about 20, if not lower, 20%. Let's go to about 60, and you just want to kind of, again, identify that top edge, a few little parts of it, maybe a tiny bit of extra kind of detailing. I'm not trying to make this too bright over here, because this is primarily in the shade in comparison. So then I'll bring the brush size down, bring it down to about 10%, and maybe just kind of, just a little bit on the top, the very top edge, like so. There we go. Just trying to bring that shape out a little bit more, and then likewise maybe a little bit on here, taking my time just to build it up. A couple of little sort of scrapes to indicate some detail, and I think that's about it. You know, maybe an occasional little wiggle or line just to show a little something, a little bit of texture, but that's it. Very, very minimal in that space. Let's then go ahead and move up towards the bushes. Now the bushes are even more kind of loose, to be honest with you. Let's go to about sort of 25%, size around about 18. You want to take a look where your bush shapes are. Over here on the edge, you want to kind of, I'm going to go even bigger. I'm going to go to that 36% mark. I'm going to just wiggle my pen along the very edge where I think that the highlight is catching the most. So I'm going to go along here, just following with a very wiggly shape. You can see how much I'm kind of jittering my hand to create all these little wiggles. Random wiggles within the bush shape as well will look nice and light and grey just to start with. Random patches, you know, really break up the shape a little bit more. Again, we added more black than we needed, so we can do exactly this. And then we'll bring the brush size down. Let's go down to about 20%, wiggle on top of those areas, and little taps little taps. You might even be able to hear it with my brush. Little wiggles, and let's just go for it now. Let's go up to about sort of 60% opacity, and that's probably a little bit too firm early on. It's still pressure sensitive, this brush, should I say. So we'll just keep creating the edge of some of these bushes, maybe a bit smaller with the brush size, about 13 now. And just creating wiggly lines and patches just to create the edge of some of those bushes, just catching the light. Let's add in a bit more love in there. Let's definitely add in some more love up and around here. Little wiggles, just circular kind of shapes almost, that are just catching the light from the scene up here. And you want to have it like kind of very messy because it'll emphasize that it's a bush, not just like more rocks. So now I'm just tapping and pushing along in different angles to create little flicks of motion. Now I'll literally scribble on top of that. I could scribble over here too, especially right over here on this edge where I want to really show that the lighting is so bright in that bit. Perhaps this edge over here we would really want to make nice and white because it's just getting the most amount of light and then it's blocking the rest of it as it comes through onto here. So they're just lots and lots of scribbles. This is the thing with Procreate, we have the luxury of zooming in, and you get so close in, you can get so lost in it, and then when you zoom out, it's just about how does it look when it gets crushed. Don't worry about the fact you can see loads of brush strokes when it looks like this. That's what it's meant to look like. But when you zoom all the way out, this is what it actually looks like. Now we're going to do the same kind of process here. So what I've got at the minute, let's just bring that down to about 40% opacity. Size can stay at 13. I want to go along the very edge of the bush-like shape that I've seen. There we go, and I've created. So I'm going to go along, just following the very edge, creating eventually like a bit of a border around the very edge of the shape. Lovely. And then a little bit more over here. And then what we'll do is bring the opacity up to about 70%, bring the size down to about 8, and wiggle your pen just through there, just showing how the light is coming across, but it's catching on the opposite side of the bush. Therefore, it just ends up looking a bit more like an outline. And we can't really do too much up here because there's not a lot of grey here that was pushed up. So you could perhaps push that up a bit more if you needed to. But just a few little sort of taps to show like a bit of a gap in the bush will look fantastic. A little something like this. And that just outlines that one on the right hand side enough that you can see how the light comes through. This one is very much a silhouette, but this one's getting bathed in it. It's absolutely stunning. And then we're going to start to get into the final few little effects. The only thing I want to do first of all is go to my smudge tool, triple check it's the medium brush, of course. Opacity 50%, size varies depending on what you're doing, of course. 8%, let's just go ahead and just, I want to blur out the bottom down here. I want to blur out the rock as if there's maybe a little bit of mist down here, and perhaps the stone actually carries on down, but we don't get to see it because the mist overtakes. I'm going to go around in a circular motion. I always like the edge of my frame to primarily be the background, which is white, of course. I like it to kind of have that, like it's all captured within this kind of blurry image almost. So I'm just blurring that out, a little bit of a blur, pushing it in the direction I want it to face. And again, in a similar way, just pushing it in towards the center, then blurring out this by pushing from the outside in. You can go backwards and forwards, mind, push up and down all over the place. Pushing in nice and randomly will look absolutely excellent. Now look at this, I pushed in twice there. I pushed in once and then I pushed in again, and it actually helped emphasize the shape of the stone. So you can do that, you can push in at random points to help maybe emphasize the stone and the breakup of those shapes. It may help, just take your time just to create something nice and random on that edge, and it may, bring something else out of the scene. Let's take a look over here. I'll blur this out a tiny bit. I don't want to get rid of too much of the charcoal. I do quite like having the kind of graininess at the same time for me. So let's push that in. This edge is nice and tidy, pretty happy with that. Up here, I just want to make sure that the bushes don't get towards the edge of the scene too much. So I like to push them in. That looks nice and messy, I really like that. Again, if you need to, you could push up a little bit more grey here, just left to right motion. Try to avoid your bushes, of course. And then we also want to go ahead and go back to our eraser. You want to still be using the Eagle Hawk, but you now want to go to that 100% and set your brush to something nice and small, like a 5 or 6. Now, this is where I urge you to swipe this to the left and duplicate it and turn off the bottom one. and then delete the black one from before, because we're now going into another stage of it. This is that final stage where, because you're now doing 100%, everything you draw in right now is going to be 100% white. It is just going to reveal the background because it's set to 100% opacity. The eraser, it's cutting out 100% volume. So what we can now do is we can work in little elements that we want to in here that's going to just really, really pop. Go to about 10%. I'm going to wiggle along that top surface of the water. Again, I want to show the lighting is brighter up there. That's where the light comes through. I've got 8% here as I just lightly flow in some whiter water up here. Just making it follow suit, and it's going to give us even more contrast. And this is where I said earlier on that the waterfall is not technically done, because you can do this stage now where you just add in lots and lots of specks in here. You can really emphasize some of the falling water. I wouldn't do too much of the falling water, mind you, because of course the light is up here. So that's to say that actually, if that's the case, then we could do this sort of top left corner of the waterfall, because the light is catching on it, and then everything after that falls off into a slightly lighter tone. In your rocks, you want to look in here and go, right, let me add in my final details, maybe even a bit smaller of the brush size, like 5%. See if you can brighten up any ledges, maybe even introduce new ones like that. Just seeing what you can interestingly add. Scribbles. Honestly, scribbles. Just scribbles and wiggles will look absolutely awesome with this particular style. To me, it looks raw, it looks organic, it looks real almost. Down here, sharpen these up. Go crazy. Sharpen. Let's add in some bright top edges. Not everywhere, just in majority of the places that you set out your blueprint. Let's go along here, maybe just a tiny bit on that top edge. Tiniest little bit there, just the tiniest little speckle. I think we could do maybe a little bit there. And then the bushes is where we want to go ahead and just see what we can dash in, little random specks here and there, getting that 100% right on the edge. You don't have to do this, remember. That's what the backup's for. If you prefer what it looked like and you'd already done all of your hard work, then well done to you. You nailed it first time. This is just a bit of a process, really, that can help you go through the whole of that sort of stage and building it up and creating elements. Back there, I'll just tap a few times. I'm going to go around the very edge of here with some more specks to kind of create the messiness of a bush. I'll do the same here too, just a few more dashes. Little scrapes here and there, emphasizing growth and detail. This is the artistic liberty, which I always like to say is where I just go for it and push those highlights to their limit. And it also pushes the contrast of the whole design to its limit as well, because it shows your brightest spots against your darkest spots now in their maximum distance from one another. And down here, as I've sort of showed you earlier, you can just create more and more little flicks of all sorts of stuff going all over the place. It's a still in time, remember. So you can flow the water all over the place. You can throw it in front of your rocks, let it crash, go all over, almost like it spirals out from this center point, like it's crashing on a rock, and then it's just gone poof, an explosion of water. That looks pretty good to me. I'm very happy with that. The only other thing then you can do, and this is why I'm going to get you to do it one more time, swipe it to the left and duplicate it and turn off the bottom one. You may like it with or without. We're going to go ahead and go to our eraser. We're going to go to airbrushing, and we are going to go to airbrushing, use the soft brush. Set that size, I reckon around about 7%. We're going to erase into here to create some sunny beams. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw in with a light amount of pressure, some beams coming through that gradually get a little bit brighter as you make your way through, like so. And then that just gives you that real understanding of where that lighting's coming from. It's coming from above. Now, of course, look between the two of them and see which one you prefer. You may like this one. I think it has a really nice impact to it. But when you're done, pinch with two fingers, go full screen with 4, and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. Like Instagram and Facebook are great places for me to see your finished work. Subscribe to the channel for a weekly Procreate tutorial. I've been doing it now for over 4 years, every single week, so don't miss out on all that content. But did you know there's even more content that's available over on my Patreon? That's where I post 3 more exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters, and their catalogue sits at well over 140 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording. So if you want to get access to all of that exclusive content, check out the link in the description down below. And if you enjoyed today's tutorial, well, I've actually got even more charcoal tutorials here on YouTube for you to get started on. So I'll leave some on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.